Hello, everyone. Canadian Dissident here. I got some more news for you today, and we're going to start off again with another story from Australia. Those poor guys over there. Let's just jump right into it. Okay, so here's the story. Howard Springs, Australia police arrest quarantine escapees. Now, this story is a little bit older, but it's going to move really well into the other stories that I want to talk about. And then a couple other things from there. So let's just get into it. Australian police have arrested 3 people who broke out of a COVID quarantine compound in the middle of the night. Howard Springs Centre near Darwin in the Northern Territory is one of Australia's main quarantine facilities for people returning to the country. This is a lie. We already know it's not only for people returning to the country. As far as I know, that they're still locked down. There's actually nobody even returning. I mean, maybe their own citizens are allowed to return. I'm not actually sure about that. But regardless, it is not necessarily for people returning to the country. Police said the trio scaled a fence to break out of the facility. Officers found them after a manhunt on Wednesday. A manhunt. All had tested negative to COVID the day before. These people tested negative. They break out of a facility, holding them there against their will, and the police issue a manhunt. Unbelievable. And then I love this here too. Officials did not state whether the escapees were returning travelers or locals in quarantine. But they just told us up above that this facility is for people returning to the country. So they couldn't have been locals, right? This is the reporting that we get from the BBC. It's ridiculous. Contradictions in their own article. But this is crazy. This is the state of the camps. These people they tested negative, and they're still not allowed to leave. Well, again, we're moving on to Canada. Here we go. We've got the Government of Canada announcing funding for COVID-19 safe, voluntary isolation sites in Ontario. Crazy. Today, the Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Health, announced funding for projects across Ontario to operate safe, voluntary isolation sites. Very interesting. So, in my previous video, I said that we don't have camps in Canada yet. And, well, I still sort of stand by that. It's not quite the same as what's going on in Australia. It is getting pretty close. We're told right here that these isolation sites are voluntary. Interesting. Are they really? Let's check out this story. Man forced into detention in a Canadian COVID hotel. Yeah, they like to call it hotel. They don't want to call it a camp. So, here we go. Here's the first line. You'll have to forgive Steve Dusing for not believing there are no COVID-19 internment centers in Canada. So basically, he came back from a flight, and he was told he needed to go into quarantine for 3 days or go to jail. He said, "I'm not allowed to leave the room. There's a guard at the end of the hall." He had to remain in the 9th floor hotel room while waiting for the results of the COVID test he was forced to take. Doesn't sound very voluntary to me, honestly. He was told he wasn't allowed to order in food. He's basically in prison. And he tested negative anyways. Had to pay for it. Had to pay for everything. So yeah, I don't know. I'm getting close to needing to amend my previous statement, I guess. I mean, so much for voluntary. Well, those are the main stories that I had to cover, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how this stuff happens? How did we get here? I still talk to people even now, and they always tell me, "Oh, wait, that sort of thing can't happen here." I tell them what's happening in Australia, and they tell me, "Oh, that won't happen here." It's crazy. It really is. Like, these are not things that are happening in some totally foreign part of the world. This is not China. It's not Russia. This is Australia. Australia is extremely similar to Canada in a lot of ways. But somehow people still have this mentality that it can't happen here. And so I'd like to tell you exactly why it can. Why and how. So this right here, this is the Emergencies Act. It doesn't exist anymore, but it came about in 1872 and basically remained unchanged until 1985 when they amended it and renamed it to the Quarantine Act. And then it was rewritten again in 2005 after the SARS outbreak in 2003. Now, essentially, the 1985 Act gave the government the ability to declare martial law. That's kind of the main thing, on the grounds of very serious health concerns. Now you can see this is the article here, or this is the act. Like I said, it doesn't really exist anymore because it's been changed a significant amount. But I'd like to point out here just how long it is. It's really not too long. Most of it is fairly clear to me. You can even see by the scroll bar here the size of it, about how long it is. Now I'd like to point out the change here, the Replacement Act, the Quarantine Act, okay? Look at the scroll bar on this one, okay? This is massive. This was a huge change. This act basically lets the government do whatever they want. It gives them massive dictatorial powers. Okay? This is how this stuff can happen here. Okay, now, I talked in my last video a little bit about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I just kind of mentioned in passing how it is not as good as the American Constitution. One of the main reasons for that is that the Constitution in the United States uses the very important word inalienable. Basically, what that means is that it can never be lost. It can't be taken away. If your rights are inalienable, they are yours by right. They cannot be taken away. Okay? Now, this is not the same in Canada. We don't use this at all. Here's a little guide just talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it even states right here, however, the rights and freedoms in the Charter are not absolute. They can be limited to protect other rights or important national values. Now, this is extremely important, and this is a very serious distinction because along with the Quarantine Act, this is what gives them the ability to do whatever they want, to take away all rights if they want to. So here is an article from a site called Law is Cool. I'm just going to read some of it to you because I think it's very concise and I'm not really sure that I could say it much better. And then we'll talk about it a little bit. So I kind of described the word inalienable expresses the idea of rights that the law can never let anyone take. An inalienable right is yours by the fact of your membership in the human species. No government or person gave you this right, so they can never take it away. Okay, this is a big difference between Canada and the US. Our charter does not have the word inalienable, neither in letter nor in spirit. It uses other words, but social conditions change, and what's not reasonable, free, or democratic today can become such in the future. There is a fully legal path to breaches of any rights in Canada. Now, I'd like to leave it on this paragraph because I just think it sums up our current situation right now extremely well. One can argue that these cases are extreme and that limits on our charter rights are fine because we trust our government. After all, we elect it. But consider this. First, majorities elect the government. And how certain are you what the majority will be like 20 years from now? Are you going to be in that majority? Do you want to entrust your most basic human rights to a majority? Second, even election rights in the Charter are not inalienable. Mix a national emergency with the right people on the Supreme Court, appointed by the Prime Minister, no Parliament's consent required, and the words reasonable, free, and democratic in Section 1 of the Canadian Charter can have a very different meaning. So you see, that is why internment camps can happen here. In Canada, your rights are not rights. They're privileges. And privileges can be lost or taken away. This has been The Canadian Dissident. Until next time.